요즘 세계 경제를 보면 잘 나가는 나라는 미국밖에 없는 듯합니다. 이를 반영하듯 달러화는 독주 태세입니다. 반면 유럽경제에는 먹구름이 드리워져 있고 중국과 일본 모두 고전 중입니다. 오늘도 리더는 국제경제 금융전문가 한 분을 모셨습니다. Jp모간 아시아의 매니징 디렉터인 안업싱 박사와 함께 글로벌 경제 현안들을 짚어보겠습니다. Thank you so much for your time. What's the purpose of your visiting Korea this time?
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for interviewing me, and I'm happy to meet you. I'm here for a few days. The main reason for coming is I was invited by Chairman Il Sakong of the Institute for Global Economics to speak this morning on how we assess the effects of tapering on financial markets, emerging markets, and on Korea.
Yeah, so I'm going to give some further questions about this issue. So it seems that the U.S. economy is now in the phase of kind of the recovery, and then they, as you mentioned, they started to do the tapering. But recently, another issue seems to be on the agenda, just restarting QE4. So did you heard about the QE4, the first quantitative easing?
Well, I think we're at a stage of unevenness in the global economy and central banks, how they're responding to economic factors. I would say the good news is that by consensus, the US economy is recovering. My sense is that the recovery in the US is quite broad-based. I think we've seen corporate investment picking up in addition to consumer demand and, of course, property investment. So that is good news. For the global economy, I would say the most important is the recovery of advanced countries and the US economy that is taking place. And I would say we should focus on that. Now, if the QE exit, when it takes place, is driven by a growth recovery, that is good news. And it should be manageable. But the problem is, if there is one, is that there's unevenness in the sense that the US economy is recovering. It should grow by over 3% next year. Europe is not yet recovering. And Japan, there are improvements, but more are needed.
So actually one of the, as you just mentioned, but one of the key issues is that when they start to raise the interest rate, what's your personal forecasting about on this issue and the timing?
Again, the timing is something which markets are focused on. I would stay away from timing. I think the Fed has made clear that it will give forward guidance. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to be data dependent. It depends on not just the US economy, but the effect on employment. We have to wait and see. But the bottom line is, for the global economy, an exit based on growth coming back to fundamentals is good news.
So the concern for the small economies such as Korea is that if the US raise interest rate, it may cause the big turbulence in foreign exchange market because the money is sure to move toward the US. So what's your expectation about on this issue, and then what preparation is will be needed for the Korean economy?
These are important issues which people are talking about. I would make maybe one or 2 points. The first is the evidence. The evidence of the last few years, when quantitative easing was taking place, many emerging markets had a huge surge in capital inflows. The bulk of those went to maybe 8 countries, emerging markets. Korea was not one of them. Korea did not experience this surge in inflows. And the reason is, I do believe Korea has graduated from the ranks of countries that experience these huge inflows and outflows, which gives us reason to believe that when tapering does take place, given that Korea did not experience that huge surge as other emerging markets, it will not experience a huge outflow either. And this is good news for Korea,
good news.
because it shows that Korea has probably graduated from being a country with high sensitivity to such events.
Yeah, but these days, reflecting the U.S. economy's recovery, the dollars is continue to be very strong. So the world foreign exchange market is being shaken, and also the Korean won continue to be very weak. So what is your projection of dollar's future value? So it's a very difficult question, but
well, I would say one thing: if anybody gives you predictions of currencies, don't believe them.
yeah,
Because I don't think we're at that stage yet where we can predict currency. What I will say, I will make 2 points here. The first is, as you look at the last few years, as easing took place, there were significant reactions to financial markets and asset prices around the world, in many countries. But if you look at exchange rates, the main exchange rates, there hasn't been such a huge effect on exchange rates. Now, that might change, because as the US economy is recovering, you may argue it is likely that there's going to be further appreciation as we are seeing it. So it may be that now we may see more of an effect on exchange rates than we have in the last 4 years. Now, what does this all mean for Korea? As you said, the won has appreciated, probably significantly in the last 1 year, both bilaterally with the yen, but also in terms of its effective average. And that appreciation has been quite significant. Having said that, you look at the numbers, look at exports, Korean exports. You will find that the effect on Korean exports over the last year, last 6 months, has been much less significant than people expected. And Korea has been able to maintain the market share of much of its exports. You also find that Korea continues to have a significant current account surplus. So overall, the fundamentals, the macro fundamentals, exports and current account, have not been significantly affected, so far at least, by the appreciation of the currency. It means that Korea has established a certain branding, a certain differentiation based on its products, which is good news. Now, looking ahead, obviously there are concerns about growth from a wider perspective, beyond the exchange rate, which requires structural reforms, which we all know.
But in terms of the U.S. perspective, how do they feel about the strong dollar? I mean, but it also, needless to say, the strong dollar reflect the U.S. real economy's the recovery, but it may restrain U.S. economy's recovery by having a negative effect on the export. So,
you know, the effect, the U.S. economy, as we all know, is a large economy, and what matters for the U.S. growth is the domestic economy. What matters is corporate investment, consumer, property investment. Those effects are more significant on growth than the effects of the exchange rate. You may argue that the exchange rate, the US dollar, has not appreciated in the last few years significantly, which it probably will do. But I would say people still see the US economy recovering by over 3% next year. And that reflects the reality that this recovery we're seeing in the US is really finally, it took some years to get there. It took longer than people had hoped or expected. But it does mean that now the recovery in the US is probably fairly broad-based and should continue.
Oh, yeah. So we can move to the next question about the Japanese economy.
Yes.
They are, as you know, that they are trying to turn around the economy through the Abenomics, yeah. But its economic structural reform seems to be still very weak. So, what is your expectation on the success or failure of the Abenomics?
Yes, so people like predictions of numbers and success or failure. Let's take this another way. Let's look at the numbers. Most observers still see growth of Japan's economy this year as somewhere close to 1%. I think it's 0.9 or something. And if you look at prices and inflation, it's in that same number, around 1%. It's a bit different if you take the core underlying. But with growth and inflation close to 1%, the numbers so far are good news. It's not yet at 2, which is what the government wants and the Bank of Japan wants, but it is much better than some years back. So I would say that the effects of Abenomics on the economy so far is clearly positive. What Japan wants is for this to be deepened and sustained with growth and inflation going closer to 2%. And that, as they recognize, requires a third arrow, which is of structural reforms. And I think they've already made some significant announcements, especially on labor markets, increasing the participation of women in the labor force, which is a factor from demographics that countries facing aging experience. It's a factor for Korea too. And therefore, focusing on labor markets, trying to integrate labor markets, not have duality, and trying to raise the participation rate of women is very important. And I think on that issue, Japan has made significant announcements and is trying to take policy to support it. Now, your question is, do they need to do more of the third arrow? And the answer is yes, they do, and they recognize it. But as they have emphasized, structural reforms involves changing an economy. It requires a political consensus that takes time to build. And the kind of structural reforms that are now needed globally are quite significant. So whether it is emerging markets, China or Japan, structural reforms are very important because now we're coming to how do you maintain medium-term growth. So I would say the third arrow, people talk about Japan's third arrow of structural reforms. I would say yes, more needs to be done in Japan.
So what do they have to do further? I mean, in terms of the third arrow, besides the labor market reform?
I think it is a factor faced by countries that reach that level. They need to open up the economy, open up labor markets. We know that in Japan and other countries, if you make growth more broad-based, it means you've got to open up agriculture, small and medium enterprises, and services. And in many countries, opening up the services sector is very important. In Korea too.
So bring some more competition.
So essentially it means having competition on both sides. You also need a financial sector that provides finance to new growth sectors. So it's both the real side and the financial side. And fundamentally, I think the labor market side is very important. So I think what they're doing to raise participation in the labor force is very important, and this is recognized, and I think we can expect it will continue.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is about Chinese economy. For Korea is in these days it's a bit it gives us a little bit concern because the Korean economy, the growth of Korean economy depends upon very much on the Chinese domestic market. So will they do kind of the hard landing or soft landing? Actually, we hope it's gonna it'll do the soft landing. But what is your expectation on the Chinese economy?
Well, you're right in saying that China's economy has a huge regional effect in Asia, on Korea, other countries, and global effect. And that is why the implications of China's growth model are really very significant regionally and globally. Now let's start with numbers. The numbers from many institutions are that China's economy will grow this year by close to 7.4.
7.4, yeah.
Around 7.4, 7.5. Most are, that is the consensus, I think. And I think most institutions and observers view growth remaining above 7 for next year. So I would say in the short run, we can expect China to grow by at least 7%. The problem is, however, more complicated. And I would say the best way to recognize this is to read carefully the recommendations by the third plenum last year in China, where the state leaders recognized the need to rebalance policies and to change the growth model from being dependent on exports and manufacturing to be more dependent on domestic households and domestic demand. What we do know is that there will be a transition, and while the policies are being rebalanced, growth is probably going to come down. And so the balance is for China, how does it do that? How does it rebalance while maintaining growth at a rate and a level that is needed both for itself and for the world? People think that it means growth will come down to about 6.5 in the coming years. But most people also observe that it's in China's interest and it's in the global interest, because if sustainable growth settles at 6.5 in a sustainable way, that is very strong for China and very strong for the global economy. So the challenge is, how do we get there? How do we build a growth model, a new growth model that will give you sustainable growth over time of above 6?
About 6, yeah.
And I think that is possible, and China has that potential. The challenge is the transition from where we are now to where we want to be.
So from export-oriented economy to the domestic-oriented economy. Yeah, yeah.
And what I should emphasize that China's size is almost the largest economy now in the world, almost. To change the growth model is complicated. And you can understand why there are question marks, how can it be done? But China has the buffers, China has the room, China has reserves, so China has the room to do it. And that's what I think we are all waiting for.
Yeah, but the other countries have put pressure on the Chinese government to appreciate yuan. But it seems to me that they have resisted that. So what is your expectation?
You know, in the past year, if you look at the exchange rate, the yuan, you will find periods when it has moved both ways. And I think the clear interest, my understanding is they're trying to liberalize financial markets. They want to open up the capital account, have capital integration with the global economy, and all that requires the exchange rate to be moving in both directions. And as you look over the last 1 year, you have seen that it has moved in both directions. And if you take a longer run view, going back 5 or 6 years, clearly in the last 5 or 6 years, there has been significant appreciation of the yuan. So overall, I would say number one, there has been significant appreciation over the last 5 or 6 years. Number two, over the last year, you've seen movement both ways. The challenge is to make this more spontaneous and to make this two-way movement a permanent factor. I think that's what they are working on.
Okay, now let's go to the region, the farther away, the European Union. So the European economy is now again on the issues on the other end. So do you think that they will get into recession again?
Well, I think you're asking the right question. The unevenness of the global recovery is really quite remarkable, that the US is recovering in a very broad-based way and Europe is not. I think what we learn from this is very clear. For growth to take hold, as is taking hold in America, significant structural reform is needed. And in many ways, this has happened in the US. Most say it has not yet happened in Europe. So I think what we're waiting for is for the growth potential in Europe to be changed. And that is what the world is waiting for. It takes much longer to recover from a financial crisis, while also at the same time building up or rebuilding your growth potential. It takes time. It's taking longer in the case of Europe, but it needs to happen to avoid a recession.
As you know, the Korean government has been trying to grow the Korean financial market and institution, but I think that the Korean financial institutions is still quite weak compared to the other, especially the advanced countries, the financial institutions. So can you give us some advice in terms of the policy?
Well, I think this has been made very clear by the President that in order to maintain Korea's growth potential and growth of the medium term, the financial sector has to support it. So I think that's number one. Number two, I do believe that efforts are underway to ensure that will happen over time. It takes time to happen. In fact, while I'm here, just yesterday, I had a very interesting discussion with Chairman Shin of the FSC, whom I've known well over the years. And he also emphasized that policies are being made to open up the financial sector to be more supportive of growth in new sectors of the economy. So I think this is a reality which is faced not only by Korea, but by other countries too. You see in many parts of Asia, including Japan, for example, you find the financial sector supports manufacturing and exports. It does less by way of supporting services, small and medium enterprises. And therefore the issue is, how do you build this kind of financial access? And I think this is clearly what Korea would like to do. And this is part of the process of keeping growth significant over time. It takes time to do. I do think this is the objective, and we have to wait and see.
Yeah, wait and see. Okay, this is the final question. So, what's your opinion? What's your assessment on the current situation of the Korean economy? And can you give some advice to the Korean government official?
Well, I would see this from a more positive point of view. Number one, as I said earlier, there is unevenness in the global recovery. We spoke of the US being strong, Europe being weak. Overall, global growth is somewhat less than expected 6 months ago. Now, number two, Korea has the buffers to respond, to try to raise domestic demand, to try to raise household income and household spending. And then a few days ago, dropping interest rates. So Korea is trying to boost domestic demand. It has the ability to do so. It's got the buffers, it's got the room. Now the third point is, if you look at this from a longer run point of view, next year, from all accounts, the expectation is that Korea's growth will pick up next year to well above 3.5, closer to 4. And that is good news. So that's my assessment.
네, 지금까지 들으신 것처럼 안업식 박사께서는 글로벌 경제 이슈들에 대해서 정확한 숫자를 제시해 주시면서 깊이 있는 진단을 해주셨습니다. 시청자 여러분께서 글로벌 경제에서 어떤 일이 벌어지고 있고 또 앞으로 어떤 일이 일어날지 이해하시고 예측하시는 데 도움이 되셨으면 합니다. 오늘 출연하셔서 좋은 말씀 해주신 안업식 박사님 감사합니다. Thank you so much for your time.